A peaceful afternoon in the park suddenly turns into a nightmare. Camille, a black woman, is reading a book when she is unexpectedly approached by the police. No clear reason, no satisfactory explanation, only suspicion and prejudice. Cold eyes, authoritative tones, and a decision made without regard for justice. As the handcuffs lock around her wrists, Justice knows this isn't an isolated incident, it's a system all too familiar with injustice. But they don't know that this time they've picked the wrong person. She's not just a victim, she's the one who holds justice in her hands. What will happen when these officers step into the courtroom and see justice in her black judge's robe? Will they face justice or continue to evade it? Before we begin this story, let us know where you're watching from. Share your city or country in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Tomorrow, we'll bring you another inspiring story created just for you. The story begins. A beautiful sunny afternoon in Fort Collins, Colorado. The park is filled with the laughter of children, the steady rhythm of joggers' footsteps, and the murmur of families picnicking under the towering oak trees. Amidst this vibrant yet peaceful scene, a black woman sits on a bench near the lake, a thick hardcover book resting on her lap. Her name is Justice, a respected lawyer, seizing a rare moment to escape her demanding work schedule. She is immersed in her book when the screech of tires jolts her attention. A police patrol car pulls over to the curb, drawing the attention of a few passers-by. Two officers step out, their expressions stern, exuding authority. Their eyes immediately lock onto Justice, the only person sitting alone in the area. "Ma'am, could we have a word with you?" One officer called out, his voice laced with suspicion rather than concern. Justice looked up from her book, her demeanor composed and unwavering. "Certainly," she replied. Carefully closing her book, the second officer stepped closer, his tone curt. "We received a call about some suspicious activity in the area. Could you tell us what you're doing here?" Justice raised an eyebrow, clearly puzzled. "Suspicious activity? I'm just sitting here reading." She held up her book as if to prove her point. But their probing gaze didn't waver. "Could we see your identification, please?" the first officer requested. Her pulse quickened, but she maintained her composure. "I'm not understanding. What's the reason?" "It's procedure," the second officer stated, though his tone suggested otherwise. A small crowd had gathered, murmuring amongst themselves. Some looked on with curiosity while others exchanged uneasy glances. Sensing the imbalance of the interaction, Justice sighed and reached into her purse, retrieving her wallet. As she handed over her driver's license, one officer took it, scanning the information with unnecessary scrutiny. "Justice Johnson," he read aloud, almost mockingly. "What do you do here, Ms. Johnson?" Justice took a deep breath, struggling to keep her composure. "I live in this city. I came here to enjoy the park. Is that a problem?" The officer's lips tightened. "We'll be the judge of that." He returned her ID, but instead of walking away, they lingered, posing questions that seemed less like procedure and more like an interrogation. "Do you always carry a book like that?" One officer sneered. "Are you here alone or waiting for someone?" The other added, his hand resting on his belt in a deliberately unmistakable gesture. Justice had handled countless tense situations in the courtroom, but this was different. The power disparity was palpable and their tone carried an unmistakable edge. She knew it all too well. Yet she chose her words carefully. "I will not answer any further questions unless you tell me what I am being accused of," she stated firmly. Her refusal seemed to trigger something in them. The first officer stepped forward. "Don't get smart with us," he barked. "We're just doing our job." "And I know the law," Justice retorted, her voice still steady. "I'm not breaking any laws by sitting in a public park." But reason wasn't in their playbook. The first officer reached out and grabbed her arm. "You're resisting," he stated, though Justice hadn't moved. "What are you doing?" she exclaimed, startled. The murmurs from the crowd grew louder. A man pulled out his phone, recording the scene. "Stop resisting," the officer repeated, this time louder, as if performing for the growing audience. Justice's heart pounded as she felt the cold metal of the handcuffs clamp around her wrists. She struggled to maintain her composure even as humiliation and frustration burned in her chest. The officers led her toward the patrol car, ignoring the questions from those around them. Justice turned her head toward the crowd, locking eyes with a young woman holding a phone. In that moment, there was a silent exchange, a plea to bear witness to the injustice unfolding. But as the car door slammed shut, Justice knew this wasn't the end of the story, but merely the beginning. Inside the cramped back seat of the patrol car, Justice's mind raced. She had spent years defending clients, fighting for justice, and navigating the legal system, but now she was on the other side. The absurdity of the situation hit her, but there was no humor in it, only a simmering anger. The ride to the police station was in stifling silence, save for the crackle of the police radio. Justice stared out the window, her reflection blending with the passing scenery. Her wrists ached from the handcuffs digging into her skin. At the police station, things only worsened. The booking process was invasive, humiliating, and designed to strip her of her dignity. She was fingerprinted, photographed, and led to a small cell with buzzing fluorescent lights. "Enjoy your stay," one of the officers said smugly as he slammed the cell door shut. Justice sat on the cold bench, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. She replayed the events at the park in her mind. How had such a peaceful moment twisted into this? The answer was as clear as it was bitter: prejudice. Hours passed before anyone acknowledged her existence again. A young officer approached the cell holding a clipboard. "Ms. Johnson, you are being charged with resisting arrest and obstructing a police officer," he stated coldly. "On what grounds?" Justice asked, her voice sharper than intended. "You can discuss that in court," he replied before turning away. She let out a slow breath, forcing herself to think strategically. The charges were flimsy, and she knew it. But she also knew the fight ahead wouldn't be easy. Cases like hers rarely were. Eventually, Justice was released on bail. As she stepped out of the police station, the cool night air hit her like a wave, a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere inside. She saw her colleague and friend, Liberty, waiting by the curb. "Justice," Liberty rushed over, her face a mix of relief and concern. "Are you okay?" Justice nodded, though her body betrayed her with a slight tremor. "I'm fine," she said, though the words sounded hollow. As they drove away, Liberty kept glancing at her, waiting for her to speak. Finally, Justice broke the silence. "I'm not letting this go, Liberty, not this time." Liberty gripped the steering wheel tighter. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking I'm tired of this happening," Justice replied. "I have the tools, the knowledge, and the resources to fight back, and I will." That night, Justice sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by legal papers and open books. She worked tirelessly, drafting a civil rights lawsuit against the officers and the police department. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with a simmering determination. As the days turned into weeks, the community began to rally around her. The video of her arrest, shared by the young woman in the park, had gone viral. People from all walks of life sent messages of support, sharing their own stories of injustice. With each email, each phone call, each comment, Justice's resolve grew stronger. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for everyone who had been silenced, humiliated, or dismissed. But even as she prepared for the battle in court, she couldn't have predicted the moment justice would take an unexpected turn. The weeks following Justice's arrest were a whirlwind of emotions and relentless work. Her law firm was initially hesitant, concerned that her public case might tarnish their carefully cultivated reputation. But Justice was unwavering. She explained calmly yet firmly that this fight wasn't just for her, but about setting a precedent. The viral video had done more than spread her story, it had ignited conversations across the city and beyond. The footage of Justice, calm yet defiant as the officers forcibly led her away, became a symbol of resilience in the face of injustice. Reporters began calling, requesting interviews, but Justice declined them all. She wasn't interested in media attention, her focus was on building a case that would not only hold the officers accountable but also expose the systemic flaws that allowed such behavior to persist. At night, when the world was quiet, the weight of the situation would crash down on her. She replayed the arrest in her mind, the dismissive tone, the handcuffs, the murmuring crowd. She thought about how easily things could have escalated. The thought knotted her stomach, but it also fueled her resolve. One evening, as she was reviewing her research, Liberty stopped by with takeout. Justice barely looked up from her laptop as Liberty placed the food on the table. "You've been at this for hours," Liberty said gently. "I don't have a choice," Justice replied without pausing. Liberty sat across from her, studying her face. "You know, this isn't just a legal battle, right? People are watching you." Justice closed her laptop, finally meeting her friend's eyes. "I know," she said, her voice steady. "That's why I can't lose." Her preparation was meticulous. She researched similar cases, establishing precedents and gathering evidence to refute the officers' claims. She enlisted the help of trusted colleagues, building a legal team that shared her passion for justice. But it wasn't just about the courtroom. Justice was also focused on engaging with the community. She attended town hall meetings, listened to others who had experienced similar injustices, and even spoke at a local college about the importance of accountability. One afternoon, as she was walking to her car after a meeting, a stranger approached her. "Ms. Johnson," the woman asked hesitantly. "Yes. I just wanted to say thank you," the woman said, her voice choked with emotion. "For standing up to them, for standing up for all of us." Justice felt a lump in her throat. She managed a small smile. "I'm just doing what I can." The community support was a double-edged sword. It fueled her, but it also added to the pressure. She couldn't let them down. Then one day, her lawyer called with an update. The officers she was suing had filed a motion to dismiss the case. Justice had anticipated that it was a standard move to delay the process. But as her lawyer explained the next steps, she froze. "Justice," he said cautiously, "there's something else you should know. You've been assigned to preside over one of their cases next month." The irony was staggering. Justice leaned back in her chair, processing the information. She had spent weeks preparing to fight these officers in court, and now fate had handed her a different kind of justice. For a moment, she wondered if she could do it, if she could sit on that bench and remain impartial. But then she thought about everything they had put her through, about the people who were counting on her. This wasn't just a coincidence, it was an opportunity to show what true justice looked like. The courtroom buzzed with hushed whispers as people filed in, finding their seats. The case was unremarkable, an internal misconduct hearing involving two officers accused of excessive force in an unrelated incident. For most, it was just another day in the justice system. The two officers, Miller and Smith, sat at the defendant's table, their uniforms like armor. They leaned towards each other, speaking in hushed tones, their expressions indifferent, almost bored. For them, it was procedural, another hurdle to clear, another case to dismiss. Then the judge's chamber door opened and the room fell silent. Justice stepped onto the bench, her black robe billowing behind her. She moved with purpose, her expression calm yet authoritative. As she sat down, she glanced at the defendants. The reaction was immediate. Officer Miller's face paled, his eyes widening in disbelief. Smith shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening as he tried to process what he was seeing. It was her, the woman they had humiliated and arrested in the park. Justice allowed a brief pause, letting the weight of the moment settle in the room. Then, in a clear, steady voice, she began the proceedings. "This court is now in session, please be seated." The officers sat rigidly, their composure shaken. Miller whispered something to their lawyer, who nodded but kept his focus on justice. For the first time in weeks, Justice felt the upper hand. But she knew this wasn't about revenge. Her role as a judge demanded impartiality, and she would uphold that standard. Still, the irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. As the lawyers presented their opening arguments, Justice maintained her professionalism, listening intently and taking notes. But occasionally her eyes would flick towards the officers. She could see the tension in their shoulders, the way their hands fidgeted subtly. During a break, Miller and Smith stepped into the hallway, their voices low but agitated. "How's she the judge?" Miller hissed, his frustration barely contained. "It's got to be rigged," Smith muttered, shaking his head. "It's not rigged," their lawyer interjected. "It's a coincidence and you need to focus. She's not the enemy here, your actions are," their lawyer stated. But the officers weren't listening, too consumed by the surreal nature of their predicament. As the trial continued, Justice maintained her composure, ensuring the hearing proceeded fairly and efficiently. Yet her mere presence seemed to unsettle the defendants. Every time she addressed them, they shifted in their seats, their confidence eroding bit by bit. At one point during a witness's testimony, Justice caught Miller glancing at her, his expression not one of defiance but something closer to regret, as if he was beginning to grasp the gravity of what they had done. By the end of the day, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Justice adjourned the hearing, her gavel striking with finality. "We will reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m., she announced. As the room emptied, Justice lingered on the bench, organizing her notes. She could feel the weight of the officers' gaze as they hesitated by the door, clearly debating whether to approach her. Ultimately, they didn't. They left in silence, their footsteps heavy with the realization that this was far from over. But for Justice, the real challenge lay not in the irony of the moment, but in the decisions that would follow and whether justice would truly prevail. The courtroom was packed the next morning. News of the unexpected twist had spread, drawing a larger crowd than usual for a misconduct hearing. Some came out of curiosity, others to support Justice, even though they knew her role as a judge meant she couldn't show favoritism. Justice entered with her familiar calm, poised demeanor, her robe flowing as she took the bench. The lawyers wasted no time diving into their arguments. The prosecutor methodically presented evidence against the officers, offering testimony from the victims of the excessive force incident. "Your Honor," the prosecutor stated, "the officers' actions were not merely a lapse in judgment, but a blatant abuse of power. Their behavior reflects a pattern of disregard for the very people they swore to protect." Justice nodded, taking note of every word, her pen gliding across the notepad. Her focus remained unwavering, even as the defendants shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. The defense attorney rose to counter, his voice measured but tense. Your Honor, while we acknowledge the incident in question, we argue that the situation escalated due to factors beyond the officer's control. Their intent was not malicious, and we believe this case lacks sufficient grounds for punitive measures. As the arguments continued, Justice couldn't help but notice the parallels between this case and her own experience. The excuses, the justifications, it was all too familiar. Yet, she pushed her personal feelings aside, determined to let the truth guide her. When it came time to cross-examine the witnesses, the tension in the room heightened. The prosecutor called the victim to the stand, a young man named Alex. His voice trembled as he recounted the night he was thrown to the ground by the officers during a routine traffic stop. "They didn't even give me a chance to explain," Alex said, his eyes darting nervously between the lawyers and the officers. "It felt like they had already decided I was guilty. Before I could even open my mouth," Alex said. The prosecutor pressed on, "And did you resist their commands at any point?" "No," Alex replied firmly. "I was scared, but I did everything they said." It didn't matter, they had already made up their minds. The room fell silent as the defense attorney stood to cross-examine. He tried to find holes in Alex's testimony, but the young man held his ground. Justice watched intently, her expression unreadable. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The defendants were called to testify. Officer Miller was the first to take the stand. He glanced nervously at Justice as he swore the oath, his voice trembling as he answered the prosecutor's questions. "Officer Miller," the prosecutor began, "you are accused of using excessive force in this incident. Can you explain your actions that night?" Miller hesitated, his eyes flicking towards Smith before answering. I thought the situation was escalating. I made a split-second decision." "And do you believe your actions were justified?" Miller shifted in his seat. "At the time, yes. But looking back, I might have handled things differently." The prosecutor pressed on, "Handled things differently how?" "By not throwing an unarmed, compliant man to the ground." Miller opened his mouth, but no words came out. His silence spoke volumes. When it was Smith's turn to testify, his demeanor was similarly strained. His attempts to justify their actions only deepened the prosecutor's case, highlighting the officer's lack of accountability. Justice listened intently, her face expressionless, but inside she felt a mix of disappointment and pity. These men had been given power, but they had wielded it recklessly, leaving a trail of harm in their wake. As the day wore on, it became clear that the evidence against the officers was overwhelming. The prosecutor's closing argument was powerful, urging the court to set a precedent that abuse of power would not be tolerated. As the defense made their final statement, it was clear they were grasping at straws. Their arguments lacked conviction, and even the officers seemed resigned to the likely outcome. Justice adjourned the hearing, her voice steady as she announced that the verdict would be delivered the following week. As the courtroom emptied, Miller and Smith lingered near the exit, their faces pale and drawn. For the first time, they seemed to grasp the gravity of their actions and the reality of what awaited them. But justice isn't just about punishment, it's about accountability, change, and ensuring that the mistakes of the past are not repeated. A week later, the courtroom was silent as Justice entered to deliver her verdict. Every seat was filled, the tension almost palpable. Reporters lined the back wall, their pens poised to capture every word. This wasn't just a case about two officers anymore, it had become a symbol of a larger fight for justice and accountability. Justice's voice was calm but firm as she began, "The role of law enforcement is to protect and serve the community with integrity, respect, and fairness. When those entrusted with this responsibility abuse their power, it erodes public trust and causes harm that extends far beyond the immediate victim. This case has laid bare the consequences of such actions." She paused, her eyes sweeping across the room. Miller and Smith sat at the defense table, their heads bowed, the weight of her words unmistakable. The evidence presented has demonstrated that officers Miller and Smith acted with unnecessary force, disregarding the procedures they swore to uphold. Their actions were not only unjustified, but they also revealed a troubling pattern that must be addressed. Justice outlined the consequences: mandatory suspension without pay, participation in extensive retraining programs, and an official disciplinary record that would follow them. The verdict was stern but fair, striking a balance between accountability and the opportunity for reform. As she concluded, Justice closed the case with a decisive strike of her gavel. "This court is adjourned." The officers stood, their expressions somber as they prepared to leave. Before exiting the room, Miller hesitated and turned to Justice. "Your Honor," he began, his voice barely audible. "I'm sorry. It wasn't enough to undo the harm, but it was a start." Justice nodded, acknowledging his words without offering absolution. She knew the true change would come through actions, not apologies. As the courtroom emptied, Justice remained seated, taking a moment to reflect. She had seen justice served, but the victory was bittersweet. For every case like this, countless others went unspoken, unresolved. Later that evening, Justice attended a community meeting at a local recreation center. The room was packed with people eager to share their stories, their frustrations, their hopes. As she listened, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. An elderly woman approached her after the meeting, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you," she said, clutching Justice's hand. "What you did in that courtroom, it meant so much to us." Justice smiled gently. "This is just the beginning. We have much more to do." The following weeks saw meaningful conversations between community leaders, law enforcement, and local activists. Justice used her platform to advocate for reforms, emphasizing the need for transparency and accountability in policing. The case had sparked a ripple effect, not just in Fort Collins but across the state. People began demanding change, pushing for policies that prioritized fairness and equality. For Justice, the journey wasn't about personal vindication but about ensuring that others wouldn't have to endure what she had. The fight for justice was ongoing, but moments like these reminded her that change, however slow, was possible. As she stood on the courthouse steps one afternoon, watching a group of young activists gather for a peaceful protest, she felt a surge of hope. The system wasn't perfect, but with enough voices, it could be nudged towards progress, and she thought, that's the kind of justice worth fighting for. This story is a reminder that justice lies not only within the legal system, but also in the individual actions of each person. When faced with injustice, will you choose silence or stand up to fight? Have you ever experienced a situation where you had to defend your rights or the rights of others? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might inspire and create change. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to share it with your friends and family to spread the message of justice, responsibility, and change. Please subscribe to the channel to not miss the next stories, where we bring profound life lessons. Thank you for watching and supporting. Let's act together with small steps to build a more just society. Wishing you strength and peace. Thank you for supporting the channel. Please like, share, and subscribe to receive the latest updates. The stories are collected from various sources and do not represent any individual or organization. They are shared with the aim of spreading humanistic values in life and have been rewritten with AI support. If there are any errors, please overlook them with understanding. Wishing you all the best in life.